final product feeling like it finally being brought by Microsoft, offering a sci-fi inspired twist to classic tales from Norse mythology. While it all looked good on paper, it proved to be less than compelling in execution, as the game was brought down by repetitive pacing and a really awkward control scheme. Overall, it's really just too bad that Too Human fell short.
Welcome to the summoning pit.
My mom's tougher than that.
Number 6. Hellgate, London. Set in a post-apocalyptic London, this hack-and-slash RPG tasked the player with fighting legions of demons in an intense dungeon-crawling style gameplay reminiscent of the Diablo series. Speaking of which, this game was also developed by a team made up of several employees from Blizzard who had previously worked on Diablo. With Hellgate drawing inspiration from Diablo's gameplay style, yet with an entirely fresh world to play around in, this was bound to be a hit in the making. Strangely enough, the game just couldn't recapture the same magic as before, with critics citing the gameplay as being repetitive and quite shallow. It also didn't help that the online modes were prone to crashes and slowdowns. Number 5. Steel Battalion.
Did I mention? CP, this is Bravo 1-1, solid copy.
Hot off the heels of their widely praised Dark Souls, maybe you've heard of it, From Software turned their attention towards creating a highly ambitious, control-heavy experience about giant tanks and big explosions. To be fair, totally cool idea, right? Using the Xbox controller and Kinect peripheral, the developers wanted to simulate what it would be like to command a big hunk of destructive metal around the battlefield. All of this intriguing possibility completely falls apart once you jump into the gameplay, since it just doesn't really work. Gamers and critics alike slammed the product for being frustratingly unresponsive, leading to an overall disappointing and unbearable experience. I mean, we're sure that this is the same From Software, right?
And what's left? Nothing to look forward to. Nothing to look back on.
Number 4. Daikatana. John Romero was once a big deal in the video game industry, having lent a hand to the creation of now iconic works in the FPS genre, such as Doom and Quake. So it looked like he could do no wrong. His next project, Daikatana, was hugely hyped based on his reputation alone. But, as you may have guessed now by watching this video, the final product was hyped way out of proportion. Aside from a number of production setbacks harming the overall quality of the game, many aspects of the game's design, such as cumbersome save states and awful AI companions, dropped the game down even further. Needless to say, Daikatana died pretty quickly upon arrival.
It appears that Daikatana will finally be unleashed upon us all at the end of the year.
Number 3. Lair.
Our scouts are reporting increased Mokai troop. I want all the Sky Guard on top of their training. That's why we're going to perform some basic flight maneuvers today.
If you took Factor 5, who made the excellent Rogue Squadron games, and asked them to swap piloting X-Wings for flying dragons, you'd have a match seemingly made in heaven. Watching videos of gameplay up to release made Lair look totally mind-blowing, but getting your hands on a controller and playing it for yourself turned out to be another story. While the graphics, story, and sound design were all top-notch, the most difficult part of the game, the actual gameplay, was beyond broken. The game had forced motion controls that were basically unresponsive, making even the simplest of tasks infuriating chore. PS3 gamers needed a worthwhile exclusive at this time, but they were left with nothing but heartbreak, unfortunately.
I've never seen anything like it!
Number 2. Sonic the Hedgehog, 2006.
Wow, that's a pretty snazzy performance there.
Often referred to as Sonic 06, the only place that Sega's blue mascot ran to this time was straight through a wall. Quite literally sometimes. In the lead up to the game's release, Sega wanted to have the game out in time to celebrate the franchise's 50th anniversary. But what could be one of the most boneheaded decisions the gaming industry has ever seen, Sega decided to split up the development team to have one half work on Sonic and the Secret Rings for the Wii, while also tightening Sonic 06's deadline. The end result of this mismanagement was a game that just felt really unfinished overall, with terrible controls, glitches galore, and a terribly awkward furry-inspired love story. What the heck were they thinking?
Please, smile.
Before we reveal our top pick, here are a few dishonorable mentions.
Get him away!
Number 1. Aliens, Colonial Marines.
Back to base.
Considering the influence that the film Aliens has had on countless video game franchises, it seemed only fitting that a video game based on the film itself should roll around sooner or later. The first handful of trailers and gameplay revealed seemed to be everything that fans could hope for, but in the end, well, I believe Hudson said it best.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
In a world where remasters and remakes are becoming more and more commonplace, it's opened up a treasure trove of nostalgia for fans young and old. Now, alongside the usual FIFA and Call of Duty installments, developers are seeing the value in reviving old franchises. Now, don't get me wrong, not every title deserves the resurrection treatment. After all, who really wants to see another Bubsy game? However, the 10 franchises we've chosen are not only deserving of a fresh entry, but will probably make you wonder why it hasn't happened already. With this in mind, I'm Jules for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 forgotten video games that should totally be revived. Number 10, Power Stone. When you've got a game that regularly topped polls of best Dreamcast game, then you know you've got something special on your hands. Alongside Smash Bros, Power Stone was the party fighter of the day. Mixing in colourful characters, that classic Capcom style, and a bunch of hilarious weapons, it was an unrivaled joy to play and a great way to make enemies of your friends. Because of the 3D fighting environments, Power Stone allowed fighters to interact with environmental objects in order to get the edge on their opponents. So if somebody's just spamming kicks, then just lob a table at them. It's the Power Stone way. And for that reason alone, should get another sequel. Number 9, Fight Night. It's weird to think that 6 years have passed since the last installment of the Fight Night franchise, a series that dominated the boxing genre for so many years. Yet EA clearly got tired of the sport of gentlemen thugs and decided to drop the anchor and sail off with UFC instead. Now, don't get me wrong, the UFC games are great, but in its day, Fight Night was f***ing rocky, in that it was a whole mess of punches, and if I was playing, not a lot of blocking happened. Fight Night Champion, the last game to come out, even featured an emotional single-player story alongside some of the tightest controls in the series. It deserves a comeback, as it's a franchise we feel can go the distance. Guys, I've got them. Number 8, Roll Cage. There are a lot of racing games out there, spanning from kart races to sci-fi super speedsters. But one game which had a wicked concept but an unfortunate lack of gas was Roll Cage. Made by the same devs responsible for Destruction Derby and Wipeout, Roll Cage offered visceral racing without the limitations of gravity. The ability to drive on walls and ceilings with ease made for races that rewarded creative thinking, and when coupled with a bumping soundtrack by Fatboy Slim and weapons to level your opponents, made for a ridiculously fast-paced experience. There was a spiritual successor of sorts in the form of the game Grip, but an official entry would be so welcomed in this current climate of competitive racing. Number 7, Skate. The skateboarding genre is aching at the moment. With the utter balls that was the last Tony Hawk game, and it being 7 years since Skate 3, we need something to come back and give the counterculture some love. And while I adore the Tony Hawk's franchise for the most part, it's Skate which needs to return. With its fantastic graphics, butter-smooth gameplay, and utterly na-na soundtrack, Skate has been the best interpretation of the medium. What other game can be this utterly engrossing? Just rolling through the vibrant cities, carving down long hills, and hitting huge airs. It's such a positive experience through and through. Plus, if all the existential chill boarding gets too dry, then you can have a laugh with the amazing ragdoll physics, build your own ramps, and play with the city to your heart's content. It's utter bliss, and it needs to come back. Number 6, Siphon Filter. Siphon Filter was the crystallization of the third-person shooter form, combining tight controls with really fun running and or gunning. The series hit its peak with its first 3 games and then saw diminishing returns on each further sequel, but the concept of a stealthy and action-focused game has been shown to work with the latest Splinter Cell titles, so could easily make a return. The game's focus on espionage, counter-terrorist operations, and a whole load of tasering people until they set on fire was utterly great. Plus, the studio that made the original games is now part of Sony, and it's even producing the rather tantalising Days Gone. Therefore, if that game sells well, what's to stop Siphon Filter making a return? Number 5, Burnout. 2008. What a great year. The Hadron Collider, Obama becoming president, that day that I set the record for single most casualties with a food processor. Oh, and it was the year that one of the best arcade races of all time got released. Burnout Paradise sure was that. A paradise of beautiful environments, insane speed, and more variation than your mum's sex moves. Puns, I've got them. Now, many attribute the decline of Burnout due to EA snapping up the studio and favouring its own need for speed antics. And while those games have been for the most part great, they still lack the arse-out exhilaration you get from the Burnout titles. And to be honest, we could all use that Crash Mode multiplayer in our lives once more. Number 4, Banjo-Kazooie. 2008. What a shit year. Earthquakes in Sichuan, riots in Greece, the day I broke the record for single most shots taken after mixing up my Nesquik with chocolate-flavoured laxative powder. Oh, and it was also the year that one of the worst reimaginings of a childhood classic took place since Barney the emo dinosaur sang "I cut you, you bleed me." I'm speaking, of course, about Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, a shoddy vehicle game in an empty world devoid of fun. I'm not bitter, I promise. The series needs a proper comeback, as the original 2 games were a huge amount of fun, mixing puzzles with over-the-top characters and a whole load of collectibles. There have been several rare Splinter companies since you've tried and failed to recapture the vibe, with Yooka-Laylee falling just short of the mark. Here's hoping that Microsoft get their heads out of their ass long enough to know that reviving this franchise is a license to print money. Number 3, Perfect Dark. Originally conceived as a follow-up to GoldenEye themed around the subsequent Tomorrow Never Dies Bond film, Perfect Dark evolved into an original one with an immersive single-player experience orientated around protagonist Joanna Dark. As with GoldenEye, the game's true selling point was its multiplayer modes. Traditional co-op and death matches were supplemented by the likes of Capture the Flag, King of the Hill, and a mode that enabled one player to take control of Joanna while others took control of the enemies she faced. Yet, as with Banjo, Microsoft was slow to capitalise on their newly acquired property, only releasing a follow-up which was a prequel in 2005. A sequel to the original has never materialised, with an enhanced 2010 remake being all that fans have been given to say since. Number 2, Final Fantasy Tactics. Now, I know you've heard of Final Fantasy, but with 15 having rocked the socks off so many people very recently, but many often ignore the outstanding side series that were the Tactics games. Basically, they've got some of the best battle mechanics and stories in the franchise that rival even the main entries in terms of narrative and presentation. It's just a shame, therefore, that it's never really received the same love as the others, as in many ways, they're better games. They've got a damn sight less annoying characters for a fucking start. Fingers crossed if this ever did come back, it would be in the shape of the early titles and not the watered down mobile game that we got lumbered with in 2013. And number 1, SSX. But mostly tricky. It's tricky to rock around, that's right, on time, it's tricky! It's tricky. Oh! With this fantastic, bombastic tune, SSX Tricky sped off the slopes and into my heart. This arcade snow scorer was an avalanche of joy, complete with hilarious characters, some PH-fat slopes, and more beats than an abusive father disciplining his kids. Puns! I got them? Now, the last entry we got was pretty good, but it's really tricky at SSX3 where the franchise shone its brightest. Still, it's been over 6 years since our last dose of slope powder, and it's leaving me with an itch in my gums and hands. All they've got to do is strip away all the real-world stuff like the wingsuit and the oxygen meter and just give us more of the over-the-top downhill runs and characters who look like they've fallen out of a Monty Python sketchbook. And that's our list. Got any other games which deserve to be revived? Well, let me know about them in the comment section below. And why not swing by whatculture.com for more news and articles like this every goddamn day. As always, I've been Jules, you've been awesome, and I'll speak to you soon.
Hello, welcome to All Time Gaming. I'm Alex.
I'm Jamie.
And oh hell, here we...
Oh hell!
And here we go again. Because we didn't get enough hate on 6 franchises we wish would die, we're now going to hate on the ones that did die.
To be fair though, the reasons why we're glad the franchises died could be anything from the publishers weren't treating them right to they were just awful to begin with.
So here's our pick of 6 franchises we're grateful aren't with us anymore.
Like my grandfather.
Exactly. The first, Alone in the Dark in 1992, was widely praised for being the first truly 3D horror game and established the series as a name in the industry. Little did developers Infogames know, little did developers Infogrames know that only 23 years later, Alone in the Dark Illumination would end it all. Ironic.
What, because now it's Alone in the Dark as a franchise?
Because it was called Illumination and it actually darkened the whole franchise. So it didn't make it light. That's back to the dark.
Well, yeah, trying to be clever.
Okay, that's not entirely true. The rot had already set in long before 2015 thanks to appalling licensing decisions and a complete lack of understanding of their audience. The first 3 games were very popular with critics and gamers alike, and even the 2001 release was liked by some. However, in 2003, Infogrames underwent a significant restructure, with the Alone in the Dark franchise emerging the other end under the control of the Atari brand. Suddenly, all the care and attention the franchise was given was tossed out the window in order to milk it for all it was worth. We probably should have noticed that the franchise was on the way out when in 2005, that murderer of cinema Uwe Boll was allowed to produce a terrible film adaptation. When he gets involved, it's time to pull the plug on the vehicle. Even Christian Slater couldn't say this.
It's because you know what it lacked? It lacked the energy of Sean Bean that he gave to Silent Hill.
It would have, if it had Bean's energy.
If it had Sean Bean, it would have been rock solid.
The 2008 reinvention of Alone in the Dark didn't fare much better and was plagued by bugs, an incomprehensible plot, terrible controls and dull gameplay. Things probably weren't helped by Atari threatening to sue certain websites over their reviews, and by the time of Illumination, I doubt anyone at Atari cared anymore. A truly sad ending to a once great title.
Agreed. One of them, whether it was one or two, I can't be sure, but it had dogs right at the beginning that was very frightening as a young child.
Yeah, dogs, they're too quick moving.
I can't trust dogs in real life. I wouldn't get a dog if I couldn't kill it with one kick.
Because it might in your face.
Yep. Jonesy, there was a time, I don't know if you remember it, where if you wanted a shooter, you would always turn to the Medal of Honor series.
I remember it fondly.
Allied Assault is rightly regarded as a classic, while other entries such as Rising Sun and Airborne were solid additions, well worth your time.
I remember Allied Assault was basically Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, Allied Assault and Frontlines both did the kind of Saving Private Ryan D-Day. See, that's the stuff I still remember in a positive light when I think about what Call of Duty World War II could be like.
Could be amazing.
Like, I want to storm the beaches of Normandy again.
Especially in modern, like, this generation graphics.
Yeah. However, that was before the rise of Call of Duty, which polished not only the single player but multiplayer as well. Significantly polished the multiplayer, in fact. Set the scene for the multiplayer.
Revolutionised the whole scene.
Suddenly, everyone was obsessing over modern day shooters, and everyone forgot about the series, which had stayed firmly in the 40s.
Ironic, given that World at War was the game that kind of got me into the Call of Duty series in the first place. Yeah.
In 2010, EA made a valiant effort to bring the series kicking and screaming into the 21st century. However, with dumb AI, dumb characters, and dumb controversies, it hardly set the world on fire. Although, thumbs up for the beards, they had some cool beards. The 2012 sequel performed well below expectation, selling just 300,000 copies in the first week. Like a drug addict, using heroin and cocaine, took a speedball, now they're vomiting up blood. They don't know what to do.
You should have seen me like Brian.
Yeah. Now compare that, Jonesy, to Battlefield 3, which had 3 million pre-orders before it even came out. And of course, with EA being EA, they're going to go where the money is. The Giant has announced that Medal of Honor could surprise us all and make a return, but for now, their focus is on Battlefield. At this point, though, it seems like a mercy killing. The series was old and incontinent, so it was time to take it out back, tearfully, back up the hammer and send the series to the farm upstate.
With a hammer? Brutal.
Part of me feels like with Battlefield and Call of Duty both dominating the market at once, I actually don't want a third franchise in there.
Too many.
Yeah.
Especially for annual releases.
Yeah. We've already gone to space and then back to World War I as they both clamber to try to do something else interesting. I really just don't need a third series trying to reinvent the wheel anymore.
I'm with you. Kane and Lynch never quite got over the whole controversy with GameSpot, did they? What would have just been another mediocre shooter passing us by on the horizon was turned into the target for all the frustration with the gaming press. From then on, the series was doomed. Which is a shame when you think about it, because the core idea held a lot of promise. A mismatched pair must work together to take on a criminal cartel. Okay, decent premise. However, aside from the shitty actions of a reviews website for firing someone simply for writing a review, the game also had to overcome other issues. Clunky controls, erratic AI, and a slow ending meant that it wasn't a bad game, just a disappointing one. It never quite came alive, and soon after felt like it became a toxic property. The sequel, Dog Days, had the chance to change up some of the negative aspects of the first, but instead they just swapped them. Instead of meandering levels, critics complained the game felt on rails, and instead of running out of steam toward the end, the campaign was criminally short. Were fans and critics predisposed to hate the game based on its predecessor? Who knows, but it can't have helped an already poorly executed series that just should have stopped after the first one. But what do you think? Was it an underrated classic or an awful game from start to finish? Did Jeff Gerstmann's firing influence you at all? Let us know in the